to choose a career when you're 18 or 25 and say, I'm going to do this forever is a big ask. I mean, we're dynamic humans. We're supposed to change. We're supposed to grow and adapt. And Buddha says that pain comes from the attachment of things. So if you're open to whatever comes your way and staying in the flow of things and seeing where life takes you, then go with that. It feels like a lot of pain to let go and jump into something new. And I would say it's more painful to stay in a stuck and unhappy place.
Welcome to the Plan B CRNA podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and I'm so excited that you're here. The Plan B CRNA podcast is the only show made specifically for nurse anesthetists who are exploring options outside of their traditional career paths. This is the place to expand your mind and your goals as we uncover new ways to produce side income together. Join me for some honest, unscripted discussions with other CRNAs who are transforming their financial lives. This episode is brought to you by On-Call Capital. On-Call Capital is dedicated to educating CRNAs and other healthcare providers about investing outside of the traditional stock market. On-Call Capital also provides opportunities for you, yes, you, to create passive income and generational wealth while also lowering your taxable income through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure you do that right now so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks so much for joining me today. And now, on with the show. Welcome to another Provider Spotlight episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. Our guest today is a real estate developer, serial entrepreneur, and wellness brand creator. Stacy Cason is a former CRNA who has the rare combination of being able to multitask while remaining detail-oriented at the same time. She's the CEO of Planetary, an innovative water-extracted hemp company in Colorado that specializes in bringing a healthier alternative to alcohol-derived cannabinoids. Determination and perseverance are not just a part of Stacy's professional life, though, as shown by her completion of the Ironman triathlon and participation in bodybuilding competitions. She believes that through a commitment to continual learning and an evolution of redefining yourself, you should set no boundaries on what you're able to accomplish. I think saying that you're busy would be an understatement, Stacy. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So, Stacy, you followed up your CRNA education with an MBA from the University of Denver and executive education from Harvard Business School. So you really are the epitome of that never stop learning mentality. Where did that drive come from for you?
When I knew I wanted out of healthcare and I wasn't sure what direction I wanted to go, the business school was a really nice, landscape. They teach you it's such a broad education. It's widely applicable. And so when I started business school, I told them I'm 33 years old and I'm not sure what I want to be when I grow up, but it's not in healthcare. So let me do anything else. They want to put you into healthcare administration. And as providers, we know that's like the devil. So I was not going to be in administration or anything else. And it was through business school. I went into it very open-minded, just like I want to explore what's out there. I went to, straight to nursing out of high school, graduated almost 20 years ago to the day as an RN and, then immediately into CRNA. So that's all I had known. And I had never really taken the time to explore what else could be out there. So in business school, I did kind of what we called informational interviews. So I would ask people in our class, people I interacted with socially, what's your job like? What's an average day like? What do you like and not like? And the goal was to have something that also built passive income. And in anesthesia, it's when you're behind in the seat, that's when you're earning money. And when you're on vacation, there's nothing, right? So the idea was to build something so we could work smarter and not harder. And I ended up making a friend through Ironman training, and we do long bike rides together. And he's a real estate developer. And so that started that conversation. And I was like, oh, every day's different. And you get to combine finance with design. I love both of those. So this could be really interesting. So he and I did one small project together. And then in time, we both left our full-time jobs and started Endurance Real Estate Partners. And we're now 7 years in business together. So that was the big jump out of anesthesia.
Fantastic. So you went from, CRNA to real estate to hemp manufacturing, that's a real evolution of your mindset. So can you know,
Yeah.
can you walk us through some of that? Like you obviously were going after passive income. Being the CEO of a
Mhm.
company is very different from passive investing. So talk us through that.
It is. So I did. It's a couple of years to kind of bridge. Like the jump out of anesthesia was not like one day. It took a
Okay.
couple of years to you know. I went to part time and then eventually completely let my license go, um, and was in real estate development. And then development's always cyclical. And then I went back to school again and did a 1 year program at Harvard for real estate management. And about the time I was graduating from that program, the opportunity came up to buy a larger piece of property, a ranch. And the only way to make it economically viable was to plant hemp, which was still pretty new at that point and pretty lucrative. But I grew up on a farm and I was not going to be the farmer. So, but it did bring the industry to mind. So, kind of studied the whole space from a 30,000 foot view. And I loved the promising healing benefits of cannabinoids. And especially at that time, this was early 2018, there was a real bottleneck in the processing. And I just didn't like the way it was being processed. So this has become a really interesting kind of merger of my science nerd background with love for business. So it set out to be, hey, I think there's a way to do this better. So that has grown into much bigger than I could have ever imagined. So we took on the task of creating a method to extract cannabinoids from hemp using just water instead of ethanol and other flammable chemicals and high heat and pressure. And this is a way that preserves the raw cannabinoids in a much more natural, gentle, and potent. So by preserving it, it makes it more potent and bioavailable. So it's actually become a nice little merger to have the science background and the medicinal background with this.
Yeah, I'm sure that that does come in handy, and particularly with the research that you guys are a part of. I mean, it's a burgeoning industry, so obviously there's a lot of research that's going into this. Are you guys participating in some of that research as well?
Yes, we have a few going and actively looking for more. That's been something that's newer, right? It's
Mhm.
cannabis research has been restricted in this country due to funding, due to legality. So other countries have done a better job. But now it's opening up since the Farm Act at the end of 2018. So we do have a couple of studies going with CBDA because our product is pretty unique. So that lends itself to some researchers. We'd written a white paper at the end of last year that compiled as a meta-analysis of all the scientific peer-reviewed journal articles out there on CBDA, which is cannabidiolic acid, and the way that it's actually grown in the plant. So CBD is not actually made by the plant; it's CBDA. It gets converted or
Okay.
decarboxylated with heat and chemicals. So reach back to your biochemistry classes.
Yeah,
Look at
it's been a
delivery.
little while. But
We did
that's
love
fascinating
chemistry.
stuff. That's
Yeah.
fascinating stuff. So then tell me about your company and what did it, obviously you're doing this water extraction. How many other
Mhm.
companies are out there doing this? And do you see the market kind of moving towards stuff like that as consumers become more aware of how their CBD is produced?
I think you said it. I think it's consumer awareness is what's going to drive it. To date, and we were talking about this at our morning meeting, there's roughly 3,000 CBD companies, and there's one CBDA company. So it's a very blue ocean out here. And what we find is most people don't know it, but our customers tend to be from outside the industry. They're people that are seeking natural pain relief, alternatives to dangerous opioids and NSAIDs. And the number one response we get back is like, "Hey, this stuff actually works." So that's always fun.
Yeah.
But we've been growing really by word of mouth. We actually haven't done much marketing to date. That's all changing now. But it's been honestly, it's been a bit of a challenge because what we're doing is so different, because we created this process, because it's totally different. Our product raw material is totally different. So that was the original intent. So we've made quite a few pivots, which I think, even if it wasn't 2020 and the crazy year that it was for everyone in business, you have to, the saying is change or die. So you always have to make pivots. There's tons of pivots. At times it's a pirouette. Luckily, I took ballet when I was younger, so I'm pretty good at this. But it's 2020 brought even more challenges. So it was a way of kind of navigating the space, and that resulted in us creating our own retail line. And that's been where we've had the most success, because that gives people a chance to try it. And once people try it, then they're like, oh my gosh, this actually works. So
Yeah.
that's where we've seen the growth, which has been really exciting.
So are you finding more efficacy with the CBDA versus a traditional CBD product? That's okay. I
Yes, for
haven't had
sure.
a chance to go through all of the research that's on your website yet. I fully intend to, but
Okay.
it's one of those
We have a
things that,
graphic.
yeah, there's plenty of stuff on your website, which I encourage everybody to go check out. It's really fascinating.
There's a study out of Spain, not I think it came out last year, that's in actual human clinical trials, which is rare in this space. A lot of them are mice or in vitro studies, but this was a human study where they administered humans CBD and CBDA. And the ones with CBDA had an 18 times higher serum concentration
Wow.
than, and then we also have THCA instead of
Mhm.
THC. And the THCA was 30 times higher concentration than THC. So the acidic form, which is the way it's made in the plant, it's kind of the raw natural way God made it, is more bioavailable. And part of it's the pH, it's the pKa, it's the molecule size. All those things are more favorable. So back to pharmacology classes,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the acidic form is generally more receptive in the body.
So then what kind of retail products are you guys offering now?
Our number one sellers are supplements, and I think it's because people are used to swallowing a pill, right? So this is an easy to swallow gel cap. Another big one is our muscle rub topical. So we have a couple of investments and a couple of topicals, and so sometimes people that are leery to try anything, the topicals seem more benign, I think. Or if you have spot pain, if you had a hard run and your knee hurts, you rub the muscle rub on, and I mean, I feel it within 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Topicals work really quickly. We have ingestibles, we have soft gels, and we also have an infusion, which is comparable to what you hear as traditional tincture. But I think
Okay.
words matter. And the word tincture means made with alcohol. And since ours is not made with alcohol ever, we changed the word. So infusion, but it's in MCT oil. And we have our process, and almost all the products are certified organic, which is also something pretty unusual for the space.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. So where do you guys see the CBD market going in the next 5 to 10 years? What's that look like for you?
I think right now there's 14% of the country even knows what CBD is. So it's still very early adopter phase. So I do see it growing. I think once the FDA makes some kind of ruling and gets out of the gray area, that will help with consumer confidence. And then I think we'll see a boost. Right now, the major retailers, the national chains, won't carry ingestibles. They might carry topicals, but you're not going to find a tincture at Target right now because they're waiting for the FDA's sort of quality statement. So I think as soon as the FDA gives some sort of ruling and there's a little better confidence and that helps to destigmatize, then I think you're going to see the major retailers carrying products. I think a lot of the big brands are already working behind the scenes to secure that. So I actually see it exploding in a few years. And I think the more research is done and the more validity, because right now, I mean, anesthesia, our job is about pain, right? And then I end up starting this company that's about pain relief. So it is kind of all come full circle, and it's kind of neat. But think about in your job as a CRNA, how many times per day did you see a patient addicted to opioids? How many chronic pain patients did you have? Probably every day you had somebody that was chronic pain. And how are they treating it? And then if they're on NSAIDs, what about their stomach? What about their kidneys? And if they're on opioids, What are they doing for constipation? What about brain fog? They're sleepy all the time. How are they driving? There's just so many side effects to deal with. And when you look at the natural products, there's just virtually none. I
Mhm.
don't think it's going to replace, fentanyl for surgery for acute major instances, but for long-term chronic pain, I see that being a huge, huge market gain.
Well, I remember, I mean, even when I was in school, over a decade ago, it was something that, there was so much talk about multimodal analgesia and, you know, the use of other things outside of even your traditional opioids and NSAIDs,
Mhm.
whether that's, hey, putting an iPod on with some suggestive,
Yeah,
music or whatever, things
yeah,
that we learn in school and then you come out and then you're in the real world and
right.
you suggest doing some of these things and you're
Yeah,
shot down, and
yeah,
so and again, that's where, I mean, it matters where you practice and what kind of a practice you're
sure.
in, whether or not you are an independent provider
Right.
or whether you're part of a larger group, with supervision and direction and all those
Yeah,
kinds of things that
yeah.
we don't have to get into. But all those things matter. And I remember being in school and the prevailing thought process was it takes 10 years for something that's a study that you find out information about to actually make its way into standard everyday practice. And you're seeing all of the
So true.
opioid free analgesia now, and that's been a big move, here in the last few years. But there's certainly, I think, room for other things, outside of your
And I
traditional
actually think
opioids.
I actually think that nursing does a much better job than the medical professions at alternative treatments. That's kind of the way we were designed and taught. And yet you're right, we get shot down a lot of times.
Nursing has been generally better equipped for
Mhm.
alternative therapies, and we just have a different mindset around it. So I think that does speak to the challenge of bringing some of those things forward,
Mhm.
as a profession when you get rid of that, head of the ship or whatever, mentality, and you truly are having a collaborative environment with different providers with different specialties. I think that makes a big difference in how quickly things like this can be adopted. But
Agreed, agreed. And I think a lot of us are, you practice based on how you were trained. And so I actually think that once we start educating in medical schools, in nursing schools, in residencies, that's when you'll start to slowly see the change implemented. But so many providers are stuck in, this is the way I do it, this is the way I learned it. And it's actually, I've found the medical field to be incredibly slow to adopt. I think the business world adopts a whole lot faster. So
yeah.
I I wish we could get in and educate, medical students and residents early on that there are other treatments. When I wrote a big blog on pain and opioids recently, and so I did a lot of research for it, and it got back to the why, like how did we get here? And I don't know when you graduated nursing school, but I was 2001, August of 2001. And it's anyway, my research found that's the year that Joint Commission named pain as the fifth vital sign. And it had to
Mm,
be assessed and it had to be treated. And so the big push then was that we have to assess pain and treat it. And so even when patients weren't complaining, if you're asking them every hour, are you in pain? It's psychology says they're going to want to people please. So people are
mhm.
like, well, I think she wants to hear yes. So they're like, yeah, actually, I'm in a little pain. And then, oh, look, I can give you some, whatever, morphine for it. And they're like, oh, that was nice. That feels good. And that's where it
Mhm.
got pushed. And that's where our opioid use in this country, I mean, skyrocketed. So
Yeah.
currently, the United States is 4.4% of the world's population, and we consume 80% of the world's opioids.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Oh,
it is
it's
painful to be an
amazing.
American, but not that painful. So,
Yeah, I'll say too, just my personal experience as an anesthesia provider, when I was in a practice that I wasn't able to do as much of the multimodal stuff, you start to do, more opioids to
yeah,
compensate. And
yeah.
so I was a Dilaudid guy. I loved
Oh.
Dilaudid. And, and it was something that I could always take a patient to PACU and they weren't going to be in pain when they got there,
And then
and
you
so
get
I
brownie
wasn't.
points with the packing nurses.
Exactly. So you're going off of incentives.
Yes.
and
Oh,
what, how you're incentivized to practice, and
yeah.
so what do those rewards look like along the way?
Mhm.
And so I
And the
knew that.
surgeons are like, "Can you shut her up?" I'm like, "Well, it is called a MAC. I mean, she's supposed to be conscious. You could also use your local," but you're like, "No, shut her up." So
Yeah.
you slam the propofol, and you're like,
Yep.
"Okay,
Yeah.
there was a better way to do this, but here we are."
Yeah,
So
yeah, and I do think propofol has masked a lot of things over the years. It's a wondrous drug, and I love
for
it,
sure,
but
for sure.
still, it's something where we've been able to have a lot of changes within anesthesia practice as a result of having such a forgiving drug.
For sure.
Um, the hope is that we can maybe figure that out with the analgesics as well.
Right. I mean, what's another really cool thing about CBDA as it relates to anesthesia is it's incredibly potent anti-nausea, and it acts on the 5-HT1A receptors. So what I want to do, and we're scoping out a study that hopefully we can do in the Denver area soon with a group of surgical patients, is you give them CBDA pre-op because it won't increase their bleeding risk, and it will help keep down inflammation. I've done it on a few patients anecdotally that I know, and they've had great results. So we just need to build it out in a formal study,
Yeah.
but would prevents post-op nausea, vomiting, and decrease inflammation. So to start it preoperatively and then continue immediately post-op, I think it would reduce their opioid requirements. It would reduce the Zofran and the post-op nausea, vomiting afterwards.
Hmm.
So that's where I'd really like to see it implemented.
Very cool. Very cool. So, and that's a perfect segue because I wanted to get back to, the idea of like how it felt for you when you finally made that decision to say, you know what, I think I'm going to walk away from my license and my career,
Yeah.
and go in the pursuit of these other avenues.
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
I was really excited. I think because it took a couple of years to get there. So the final year of anesthesia, when I knew I was on my way out, there were times where I would get nervous.
Hmm.
Like, I know that I don't want to be here anymore, but this is not the kind of job you can halfway do, right? You have someone's life in your hands. So by the time I was done, it was actually quite liberating. And I had thought I'll keep my license around for a little while. So my last day of anesthesia was December 16th, 2016. And it was 10 years to the day after I graduated from CRNA school. And then it was the next summer that the license was up for renewal. And I just needed a few CMEs. And for
Hmm.
whatever reason, I wasn't getting them done. And it was down to like a couple of days. I remember this vividly. A couple of days before it was set to expire, I posted on Facebook and I said, my license is up for renewal. Should I renew or should I let it go? And I had 70 comments, which is very unusual for me. 69 said, yes, renew it. You need that. Like, always have a plan B. You
Hmm.
need to renew this. And then one person who's a dear friend of mine and an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
we were classmates in MBA school. He said, let it go, jump, you're all in. And that's what I did. I
Yeah.
didn't renew it. And
Burn the
there's some,
boats.
yeah, it was actually quite liberating. And I think it was one of the, I loved that career, and it got me where I am in so many ways. And I was really happy to let it go. It was
Yeah.
like, okay, this is the next best thing. Because when you're still holding on, when you have this idea of plan B, then you're not all in to whatever you're doing.
Hmm.
And so if you're not all in, you're not going to give it your best. If you're like, well, I have these golden handcuffs at the hospital, I can always go back to. But
Hmm.
when I jumped, I was like, no, I'm in. I'm going to
Yeah.
make this work, and I'm going to love it. And I don't ever have to go back to that windowless operating room.
Yeah. Well, I love the confidence that you have, and I think I've been reading the book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, and that is it goes into the idea of fixed mindset versus growth mindset, and the idea that you have, you know, that basically I can go out there. I've done something from nothing before.
Yeah.
I can do
Yeah.
this again. That's very much an entrepreneurial mindset,
Yes.
and a lot of people have it, a lot of people don't, and it just
Yeah.
depends on your specific mindset, and how comfortable you are.
Yeah.
I've interviewed plenty of people who have had tremendous success, but they held on to their CRNA license, and that for them was the comfort that they needed to actually excel at what they were doing. When they didn't have that, they, didn't have the confidence to go out and actually pursue something else. So it's all about mindset, really, and what your individual path is. But no, I think that's fantastic. I did the same thing, that burn the boats mentality, and hey, it's working out so far. So, but no, what is some advice that you have for others who are thinking about a path outside of their anesthesia career?
I think to follow your heart and do what makes you happy. One of my closest friends has been a CRNA for a lot of years, and frankly, she doesn't like it anymore, but she's too afraid. She's like, man, just have, 10, 15 years till retirement or whatever it is. This is what I've always known, so I'm going to stay with it. The money's good or this or that. And I know she's not happy. And that's one example, right? But I think to choose a career when you're 18 or 25 and say, I'm going to do this forever is a big ask. I mean, we're dynamic humans. We're supposed to change. We're supposed to grow and adapt. And Buddha says that pain comes from the attachment of things. So if you're open to whatever comes your way and staying in the flow of things and seeing where life takes you, then go with that. It feels like a lot of pain to let go and jump into something new. And I would say it's more painful to stay in a stuck and unhappy place.
I think that's great advice. And that's probably a good place to kind of end on. This has been such an outstanding conversation. And Stacy, I want to thank you again for setting aside some time to share your story with us.
Thank you for asking.
So I realized after our taping that I completely forgot to ask Stacy how folks could get a hold of her. Now, you can definitely find out more about her company at www.planetary.com. Now, that's PLANETARIE.com. And you can find her on LinkedIn as well and some other social media platforms. We'll have links to all of that in our show notes. And what a wonderful conversation this actually turned out to be. I appreciate that Stacy spoke about happiness and the fear of change at the end there. Yes, anesthesia has one of the highest satisfaction scores of any career field out there, and that's a great thing. But at the end of the day, doing what you love matters. And I'm not one to sit here and say, YOLO, baby, let her rip, and encourage all kinds of risk taking. But so many folks stay in the same unhappy place because they're unwilling to take any risk at all out of fear. And those feelings aren't invalid. Okay. Fear is a real factor for folks, particularly if you have others that you're responsible for taking care of. Starting over again and building something from scratch is daunting when you look back at how long it took you to get where you are in your career. But if you've done it once, you can do it again. You're good enough, you're smart enough, and gosh darn it, well, you know the rest. With any type of side hustle, though, it's important to do a proper risk assessment, and that includes taking into account opportunity cost. You must consider what you're missing out on through inaction. Could you be happier in another setting or situation? And how does that degree of happiness measure up against where you are now? Now, that's not easy to do, and the grass isn't always greener on the other side, but we all do need a change of scenery now and again. And speaking of green grass, CBD and the changing landscape around marijuana is going to be ripe with opportunity for years to come. This is just a burgeoning marketplace, and there will be new roles created and expanded on in the production, manufacturing, distribution, blogging and reviewing, food and beverage, and cosmetics areas. And that list just names a few. And speaking of opportunities, now I've actually kind of convinced myself that I need to do a rabbit hole episode on this industry. So stay tuned for that one. But as for this episode, that's another one in the books. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and I really appreciate you listening. This is your host, Bobby Jones, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. If you haven't already subscribed and reviewed the show, I'd be honored if you took the extra time. It really helps to expand our reach and get the word out about the show. If you're a CRNA who is interested in sharing your story on our podcast, I'd love to have you. Please email me at bobby@oncallinvestments.com for more information. This episode was brought to you by On Call Capital. They are dedicated to helping providers like you develop passive income and generational wealth through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. Feel free to check out their website at www.oncallinvestments.com and subscribe to their free educational email series. You can find On Call Capital on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also check out our YouTube page, where you'll find all of the show episodes along with other educational videos. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.